MSW Media.
I signed an order appointing Jack Smith.
And nobody knows you.
And those who say Jack is a fanatic.
Mr. Smith is a veteran career prosecutor.
Wait, what law have I broken?
The events leading up to and on January 6th, classified documents and other presidential records.
You understand what prison is?
Send me to jail.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to episode 33 of Jack, the podcast about all things special counsel. It is Sunday, July 16th, and I'm your host, Allison Gill.
And I'm Andy McCabe. Allison, it is another banner week for the special counsel investigation, which is, of course, always good for this podcast. In the documents case, as predicted, we have a motion from the Trump team to delay the trial beyond the end of the world. No, actually, just beyond the election. And then, of course, DOJ is fired back. We also have the first SEPA conference coming up this Tuesday and a speedy trials report filed by the special counsel.
Yeah, and that's just the documents case. And we just got some breaking news, too. We'll talk about later in the documents case. Another target letter has gone out. We knew that investigation was ongoing. He said that when he did his protective order for unclassified discovery. And so it seems like there may be more charges coming. And in the January 6th investigation, we have all kinds of news about testimony from folks like Hope Hicks and Jared Kushner. We have Wyndham, the top prosecutor for January 6th, seen twice this week entering the federal courthouse with no other notable witnesses seen, and that's in D.C. And the Department of Justice is appealing the Oath Keepers' sentences for being too short. But first, Just Security has prepared a model prosecution memo for January 6th, and joining us today is one of its authors, senior fellow at Brookings, legal analyst for CNN. Please welcome Norm Eisen. Hi, Norm.
Hey, Allison. Hey, Andy.
Hey, Norm. Great to see you somewhere other than the CNN green room.
Pleasure hanging out anywhere with the two of you.
There you go.
Yes, and we wanted to get you on quickly here to talk about this Pros memo. So I know that you're in a remote location and you're on your phone. So everybody, just that's what's going on. We're not in studio right now. I just wanted to, give a little heads up about why maybe it sounds the way that it does. But I thought it was important to get you in here quickly. But before we get to the Pros memo, can you explain what a model Pros memo is and an actual prosecution or Pros memo is?
Well, in order to get authorization to initiate a prosecution in the Department of Justice, Andy well knows, but also in state and local prosecutors' offices, you typically need to provide a prosecution memo or pros memo that explains the reasons that the charges meet the charging standards at DOJ, that is, in sum, the ability to obtain a conviction at trial and then to sustain that conviction on appeal. You identify the defendants, you identify the charges. Sometimes you'll say a word about the defenses and why they won't be successful. They're not voluminous documents. I know we'll talk about my inspiration for this 250-page model pros memo. It's the only 250-page model pros memo in the history of pros memos because the actual ones are shorter. They're more like the inspiration, Barb McQuaid's model pros memo for the January 6 crimes, for the election interference crimes that she did over a year ago. But I'm trying to do some other things in this model pros memo. Sometimes you've got to write a very long memo to be very simple. And one of my goals was to sift through everything, come up with a simple theory of the case. So it's a little longer than the typical.
I should add here to Norm's explanation, these pros memos are typically hallowed and somewhat mysterious documents. They are, at least in the federal system, they are entirely the product of the assistant U.S. attorney's who work on the cases, and they're not even shared with the FBI. So if you're an FBI agent, you brought the case in, and you've worked hand in hand with your AUSA for months, you typically won't ever even see the Pros memo. It's a very closely guarded document.
Yeah, that's really, I wish we could have seen some of the Pros memo. Like, I would really like to kick back with a brandy and read the Manafort Pros memo. But, you know, that's just me. I'm a little odd. I've got weird hobbies. But we did cover Barb McQuade's model Pros memo on the Daily Beans. But a lot of new information has been made available since her memo for Just Security. But what I take away from both is the simplicity. Like you mentioned, you break it down to three people: Trump, Eastman, and Cheesebro, and of course, ancillary Meadows and Rudy, depending on their level of cooperation. And you break it down into three parts: the conspiracy to defraud the U.S. through fraudulent electors, obstructing the electoral count by pressuring Pence, and inciting the insurrection when all else failed. And I was really struck by the simplicity of this, because I'm thinking sprawling, hundreds of witnesses, and, you know, which there is, which is, you know, evidenced in the length of your Pros memo, because there's so much evidence here. But the simplification of it, I was very struck by that. I was like, where's all the members of Congress and Ellis and, you know, all these other folks, and all the different, the wire fraud investigation into, you know, defrauding donors, everything that came up in the January 6th hearings. Talk a little bit about why you think it has to be simple like this, the benefits of it, and whether or not that was sort of informed by the recent indictment down in Miami in the documents case.
It was. Look, part of it was when I set out to do the work of what was needed, you know, the sprawling landscape of everything that happened and why it is so wrong, and going in depth was brilliantly done. Truly amazing work by the January 6th committee. I myself have worked in and around Congress for 3 decades, mostly defending congressional witnesses. Of course, I worked up there for a year as impeachment counsel for the first impeachment. I think the January 6th committee's work and their magisterial final report will go down in history as none finer in the history of Congress when it comes to investigations. But that presents a problem for writers and analysts like me, which is, how do you follow up? So it occurred to me, that we should replicate how I think DOJ and Jack Smith and his team are dealing with all that, which is to ask and this is the question that I've asked myself as a trial lawyer for 30 years plus: what is the simplest possible case? It's like the litigation version of Occam's razor. What is the simplest possible case that I can bring and win while doing justice and, you know, getting a significant jury outcome, right? You don't want to bring like one misdemeanor. And I realized it took weeks, months of sifting through that amazing work by the committee. I realized that there was this simple path that's kind of modeled on the simplicity of the Mar-a-Lago indictment, which is Trump tried everything in the world and it all failed. But when that ended, from running from the election to the failure of the Raffensperger call in early January, when that ended, he was left holding these counterfeit certificates. He pivoted, really starting the morning of January 4th, to an intense 48-hour pressure campaign on Pence to use those phony certificates. That's like counterfeit money. I mean, they're just complete fakes, to get Pence to throw Congress off of confirming the electors of the rightful winner. And when that failed, Trump resorted to truly his last ditch of violence. And with those 3 acts phony electoral certificates, squeezing pants, insurrection, map onto 3 statutes very neatly. You can have, by the way, you can have multiple counts under each of these 3 charges, right? And you will. So you can do 1 count for each of the fake electoral certificates under 18 U.S.C. 371, conspiracy to defraud the United States using these phony docs. This Act 2, the pressure on Pence, that is 18 U.S.C. 1512, the obstruction of an official proceeding in Congress, which they wanted Pence to do. And then Act 3, the violence, 18 U.S.C. 2383, giving aid and comfort to insurrectionists. And within each of those acts, you can boil it down even more for a jury. But I really tried to think about making it simple for the jury. And then, all 250 plus pages of analysis flowed from that. We do have a nice short introduction, and it does lend itself. It does lend itself to social media length explication.
Agreed.
I think that approach is so important. We've been talking about this week after week, how it's really hard to look at what is essentially an enormous mess and distill from it a comprehensive but clear narrative that you can present to a jury in a trial that will bring them to the decision to convict someone. And you look across the vast arc of everything that led to January 6th and then what happened in the aftermath. And there's tons of people and different storylines and all kinds of criming, as Allison would say, going on in many different directions. But you can't just throw all that at 12 jurors. You have to kind of pick and choose the places where your story is most impactful and most easily understood. And that's one of the things that I like about the approach that you've taken here. It really kind of focuses on what's most important. Maybe you leave some things on the cutting room floor, but those, no great novel is ever written without a really good editor, right? You have to have someone who's willing to come in and say, nope, this doesn't make the cut. Let's keep it tighter. Let's make more sense. And I think that's kind of what you've done here.
And it doesn't, 3 points about that. Number one, it doesn't have to be my simplification. There are other ways that undoubtedly that Smith can simplify this case, but I think he has to do that. No 7 chapters.
That's right.
I cannot emphasize enough what a great job the January 6th committee did, what a need there was to cover everything. Smith is clearly looking at all of those different chapters in his work. Juries cannot hold 7 things in mind.
No.
And then 3 is what they can grasp. That's point 1, so it doesn't have to be this simplicity, but some simplifying rubric. Point 2, Allison, to your comment on the defendants, that is agonizing. Smith does not need to deal, however, with letting all those potentially culpable people go. We have a whole section of the report where we identify, we call it targets, subjects, and witnesses, where we identify the huge list of people that could be looked at here. I think that big 5, the kind of Mount Rushmore of election interference, Trump and Meadows, the clients, and then Eastman, Chesbrough, and Giuliani, the lawyers. That is a sensible, and I might even go small. I mean, he is certainly keeping it to one hand in the Mar-a-Lago case. And you could even go smaller than 5. And then the final point is, within the chapters, take a simple approach too. There's a big debate you can have. Should we tell a long story about Trump's preparation for insurrection and the ellipse speech? And I wrote, Michael Ludig loved this. We got some very nice praise and a Twitter thread from Michael Ludig after we released the report. He loved my explanation of how prosecutors could deal with the First Amendment issues if they charged Trump for the ellipse speech. I say sidestep it. Occam's razor. search for this explanation that is constructed with the smallest possible set of elements. I was joking with Allison before the podcast, just for insurrection, for giving aid and comfort and insurrection under 2383, just charge the 224 tweet and the 187 minutes of inaction to evict the protesters when Trump had the power. He's admitted that, the power, and he also had the legal duty to do it. So 224 plus 187 equals 2383.
I like that math.
And I think it's very interesting too, with the simplicity of the Mar-a-Lago documents indictment. We just have two co-defendants, Nauta and Trump, and the investigation was ongoing. We learned today that a target letter went out to somebody else in that case. And so, when you talk about subjects, witnesses, and targets in the Pros memo, it's like, get these 3 done on these 5-ish, and then continue your investigation into the wire fraud, into the members of Congress, and anything else, more specific into the fraudulent electors with the, people who were down, maybe on the ground, the Wiltons and those types of lawyers, all the other 17 lawyers that were subpoenaed about, Jenna Ellis, or, et cetera, et cetera. There's so many other people to look at, but that can be done after. And I think that the timing is very interesting here because, first of all, we've got election season next year. I know that Jack Smith's team is concerned about the timing, but also the timing of your release of this Pros memo, because all of a sudden in the news, there's all of these witnesses coming out to the press and talking about what they told the grand jury in June. And now we see Wyndham going in without any other notable witnesses into the D.C. federal court, Prettyman, where the grand jury meets. And it seems like indictments could be nigh. And I think it was an important move to get this Pros memo out before any of that happened. Was there any consideration of the timing of the release of this report with the pending or indictments?
Even before we had Wyndham's multiple visits to the grand jury this week, with no apparent witnesses there, there were a lot of the signs of an investigation that is reaching its culmination were there publicly. My experience, mostly as a defense lawyer since the early 90s, my experience in my cases was you didn't want to put a Mike Pence or a Mark Meadows in the grand jury early, because you wanted to have all your other information ready so you could ask them about what other witnesses have said. You could show them documents. Giving immunity to culpable parties is not something that you do early on, because you might, you really want to be able to evaluate the food chain before you, as is reported, before you immunize or negotiate immunity with the likes of a Roman, who ran this apparently for the Trump campaign. Fake electors getting immunity, like in Nevada, right? That's more towards the end of an investigation where you've made up your mind, okay, we're not going to go for the fake electors. We're going to focus at the people at the top of the food chain. So I think there were a lot of signs. There's a vibe. There's like a buzz here inside the Beltway in DC. Something's coming. We're all on call for cable bookers, kind of on very short notice.
Not me. Let them know I'm free, though.
I will. Andy,
we'll have some of ours.
Word, won't we? Andy and I certainly are. Sometimes we see each other in the green room, and then whatever the news they're expecting doesn't happen. We had one the other week where they told us, "Go home, guys."
You got to love that
so,
drive in there for nothing. That's a winner.
For me, it's a shorter one. So,
In
and I
the
like
comedy
free
business,
hot
we call that
chocolate.
getting bumped. We call that you're ready
if
to go
you
on
do not
stage.
yeah.
You're ready to go on stage at the
If you-
Improv, and then like Dane Cook walks in and takes your spot, and you're like, I'm
Yeah.
way funnier than him.
Yeah,
but I'm fine.
you're ready to go on and talk
Um,
about SEPA hearings, and all of a sudden Britney Spears gets insulted at the ESPYs. So you're like, you're out.
You know what? If you don't like getting bumped, do not do cable TV. I mean,
That's
Andy
right.
and we're on contract, but you get booked and bumped all the time.
All
I
the
keep a
time.
complete. I know this is not what we came to Jack to talk about today, but I keep a complete separate schedule of stuff, even when I'm scheduled for cable, because half the time,
Yeah.
there's breaking news, right? And then I just apologize when I'm actually needed, or like it's never more than 10 minutes. It's got to be like historic.
Yeah.
Like the Mar-a-Lago arraignment to be more than 10 minutes.
Yeah.
So I'm just like, hey, I'll be 10 minutes late for the Zoom.
Yeah, well, we don't want to keep you today. You might get a call, who knows, any minute. So, and I'm very glad that you.
Not today.
Never on Fridays.
I know this is not one where you put the video on, but it's the last day of my vacation. I'm thoroughly in vacation mode, baseball cap and all. So today I'm going to go buy bagels. I'm going to go. That's my next big appointment after this.
It was Friday for Mar-a-Lago. I mean, Thursday night, but Friday for Mar-a-Lago. And I mean, we had the whole thing on the Mueller, She Wrote podcast. We had Felony Fridays. They always dropped on Friday.
Yeah.
So
we'll see.
Be prepared, but we definitely want to don't want to keep you too long because we know you're at the tail end of your vacation there. But just before we let you go, talk just for a second about how you see, we talked about the maybe potentially additional charges in Mar-a-Lago for the Mar-a-Lago documents case. Is that how you see it going down for this case? We get the three main ones, and then they continue investigating and continue adding indictments and charges at later dates for other people?
100%. In fact, we have an appendix on the DOJ conspiracy. Again, that Act 1 is Trump tried subverting DOJ. He tried getting state legislatures to do stuff. He tried pressuring governors. He tried Raffensperger. He tried everything. He explored seizing voting machines. When he tried the whole litigation strategy. When everything else failed, what he was left with was these wicked or gullible fake electors who had signed these certificates. So all of those other failed conspiracies should be put on the shelf. Let's bring a case to trial against Trump. Let's do it in the next year. If you get the right judge, like I've done cases in the Eastern District of Virginia, the rocket docket.
Mm-hmm.
If you get a judge who puts it on a rocket docket, now they'll charge us in DC. But if you get the right judge in DC, it can go to trial in a year. The American people deserve to know if a major presidential candidate, possible nominee, is a convicted felon or not, precisely for attacking elections. And then, like we did an appendix on Jeff Clark and the DOJ conspiracy, Smith can bring those other cases in the fullness of time. But I think, I very much think, multiple pots will be boiling on the back of the stove, but let's have a nice 3-course meal, digestible for a judge and jury.
Please be Judge Beryl Howell. Please be Judge Beryl Howell. All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. We really appreciate you taking time. And I encourage everyone to just take some time to read the Pros Memo. You can find it at Just Security or on Norm's Twitter, Norm Eisen. So, we're going to let you go now, but you're in our hearts for the rest of the weekend as we read this memo.
That's right. Thank you so much,
Thank
Norm.
you, Allison.
Great seeing you here,
Andy.
and enjoy the end of the vacay, and see you soon at work.
Always great to see you both, and have me back. It was fun talking.
Awesome.
We have so much more news to get to. This is going to be a pretty long show, but we do have to take a quick break. So everybody stick around. We'll be right back.
Welcome back. Okay, let's continue with the January 6th investigation, which seems to be running fast and noisy these days, with what seems like a whole lot of witnesses telling the media that they've testified before the grand jury, which is always very helpful to those of us watching the case closely. So in the last couple of days, we learned that Jared Kushner and Hope Hicks testified in front of the grand jury in June. And it seems, Allison, that both of them were asked a lot of questions about whether or not Trump indicated that he knew he lost the election. Of course, we have all kinds of public information that would, I think, go to proving that he knew he lost the election. You know, we have different folks who, like Alyssa Farah Griffin, who has testified before the grand jury in June also. She also told the Jan 6 committee that Trump had told her, and I quote, "I can't believe I lost to Joe Biden." So there's one pretty good indication that he knew he lost. Of course, Mark Milley said that in an interview with the January 6th committee, said that Trump had indicated in an hour-long meeting that he wanted to leave Afghanistan, quote, "for the next guy." So clearly implying that it was a problem he didn't want to deal with, and that, you know, Biden, who would be coming in next, would have to deal with it. Then, of course, we had the reports from the research firms that Jack Smith subpoenaed in January this year. So these are two firms that were brought in by the Trump folks to essentially look for evidence of fraud, both of whom reported back, "So sorry, no fraud here." And then, you know, you've got this reams of testimony from lawyers, campaign people, White House counsel who told Trump that he had lost, that there was no indications to the contrary. So what do you think, Allison, in terms of the witnesses that they're bringing in now, possibly taking the other side of that observation?
Yeah, well, it was reported, I think, by the Times that Michael Schmidt, that Jared is said to have told the grand jury, Jared Kushner, that he honestly believes Trump truly thought that he had won the election. So here's, you know, put him in the Rudy Giuliani and Sidney Powell group in our little caucus of, you know, normal and unnormal people. So, you know, I think getting everybody in, trying to figure out who's going to be, because that's a defense, right? The defense is there's no corrupt intent. Right. And you and I talked about, like, these are the last people you bring in to set up your defense. You're kind of not doing fact finding anymore, or crime, you know, then you're looking into the crime, and you're looking at what the defense is going to be and who I bring in to rebut a defense. And this is just, I think, Jack learning, don't bring in Kushner. Now, of course, like, that information would have to go over in discovery under Brady, et cetera, et cetera. But, you know, I think that that's sort of what this is, you know, like Norm said, these are indications of the tail end of an investigation and not anything that would happen in the beginning. And I think that corrupt intent, knowing he lost, it lends itself to obstructing an official proceeding. It lends itself to the wire fraud, you know, fundraising off of the big lie. There's a lot of different crimes here that you'd have to be able to prove intent for. And so I think that's what this is. I think you're
absolutely right. That knowledge of the loss is key. It's the very red hot center of intent, and intent obviously applies in any charge that Jack Smith would bring here. It's also, you know, you think about a witness like Kushner, it's not necessarily the case, and I think it's, I'm going to go further than that. I think it's unlikely that Jack Smith's team brought in Kushner and were surprised or disappointed by his testimony. I mean, it's pretty consistent with what he told the Jan 6 committee, so they likely knew what to expect. But you would still bring a witness like Kushner in front of the grand jury, even if you had no intention of using him as a witness to prove your case later at trial. You want to lock him in the grand jury with what he's saying right now, because anticipating that with that testimony, he is likely to be a defense witness over the course of his preparation for testimony at trial as a key defense witness, his statements could expand, right? He may say something on the stand in Trump's defense that goes far beyond what he says last week or whenever it was in the grand jury. So having that testimony nailed down enables the prosecutors to come back and cross-examine Kushner if he takes the stand in a trial in Trump's defense, and point out inconsistencies with what he's saying on the stand for Trump and what he said in front of the grand jury months earlier.
And what he said at the January 6th committee.
That's right. Is laying the foundation to show the jury this guy's not telling you the
him.
Truth. He's just trying to help out his father-in-law.
It's what happened with Jim Baker in the Durham Sussman in trial and investigation. And Jim Baker's a good guy, but he had inconsistent testimony between a congressional committee, inspector general testimony, and grand jury testimony, and that was helped the defense of Michael Sussman impeach him on the stand. Of course. And, and I think you're right that these are the kind of witnesses that you throw in front of the grand jury at the end. This is not like key to the beginning or middle of your investigation where you're looking for facts, you're following leads, you're really developing the investigative effort. Now you're just nailing down things that you're trying to lock in preparation for trial. Yeah, because in the May-June timeframe, aside from all of these people, were trying to get to Trump's state of mind and whether he won the election or not, they also brought in state officials that were pressured by Donald to put forth fraudulent slates of electors, including Jocelyn Benson, Rusty Bowers in Arizona, Raffensperger in Georgia, and just breaking today, the secretaries of state in Pennsylvania and New Mexico. Those are the two states, by the way, that put on their certificate the default message. This is only if the election is overturned somehow by the courts, which I think is kind of got them out of any kind of trouble in their individual states. So that, it seems like they're securing rebuttals to defense, like we talked about. And it feels like these would be witnesses that would bolster criminal charges for a grand jury about to vote. Because you get the state of mind for the fraud. I mean, if we're talking about the three charges that Norm just went over, you get the state of mind for the fraud, the defrauding the United States, obstructing an official proceeding. You get the corrupt intent for acts for conspiracy by interviewing those state officials that he pressured. And by the way, new reporting shows, this just came up today for me from CNN. McEntee and Meadows have both testified. So all 8 members of the Ocha Nostra. We've been counting down for a couple months. We have what is it, a full house? I don't know what do you even call this, but we're gonna have Yahtzee? I sunk your battleship. So we got all 8 members of the Ocha Nostra, and like we brought up with Norm, Wyndham has been seen at the DC courthouse. Is there anything else that a top prosecutor and a grand jury could be doing without witnesses besides? But like, what else would they just be like? What else could you be doing in there? You could be summing it up. You could be in there, so giving them the final. Here's what we think. But I'm trying to be fair here. It's possible that there's some sort of underlying motion practice, sealed motions that are being, fought over in court that are particularly significant. Those might draw out the chief prosecutor to either participate in the arguments or just see how they're going. Obviously, we have no information about that because we wouldn't. They would be sealed. So there's a pretty small menu of items that could pull Wyndham out of his office and send him over to the courthouse at this point. But we're missing the final meeting like we had in Mar-a-Lago where the Trump lawyers met with DOJ to dance for their life, to say, don't indict my client. We haven't seen that. And we haven't seen any shouting about target letters in this particular case for Eastman or Trump. So those are the missing elements here, which is kind of what is leading me to believe that the indictment would probably, if it comes soon at all, it's not going to come until maybe next week or the week after. And you think August. I think before Fani goes, because I think Norm is right on that. It's a really good idea to get that out there for her to see, and then maybe shuffle some things around. But Obviously we're all just reading tea leaves, but it looks to me like it did in Miami right before the stuff went down. You saw Bratt going in with the jury after the day after Budowich went in with no other witnesses coming in. But then, Trump freaked out and told everybody he was indicted on social media. So I imagine if
that's the signal, that's what is it? The black smoke that comes out. That's what I'm looking for.
Signal,
it's
right?
the ill-timed tweet of, "Can you believe I've been indicted for third time this year? It's going terrible for me."
They're going to come after you.
If not me, it would be all of you getting indicted for insurrection. Not really. But who knows? I think there's as we've said, a lot of signals that they are probably getting to the end, but predicting when exactly that day is going to be is very, very, very hard. I get asked this by CNN, I think every other day now. But it's
Norm
hard.
came out with his Pross memo, and also another, what I consider a sign, but I could just be reading too much into this. The Department of Justice has appealed the Oath Keepers' sentences, saying they're too short. And this is, these kinds of crimes are unprecedented in American history, and they need to be longer. We know Amit Mehta went 7 years below the mid-range of the sentencing guidelines for most of these Oath Keepers, sometimes 8 years below, sometimes less than a third of what was asked for. And I spoke to a lot of my friends who are Capitol Police officers, and they seemed at first, back then, they seemed satisfied. 18 years is a long time. They seemed satisfied with these sentences. But when I talked to Harry about after Merrick Garland and the DOJ appealed these sentences, and I imagine they would have had to get Merrick Garland to sign off on this. They don't have to. They just have to get the Solicitor General to approve. But this is such a high-profile case. I can't imagine he didn't have a part in this. And Harry Dunn was like, you know what? This is amazing. I feel like DOJ, I feel like Merrick Garland has my back, and I feel like he has the backs of the American people. And I thought that was a great quote from him.
Yeah.
But this, to me, seems like they're trying to set precedent for sentencing on a once-in-a-lifetime crime of insurrection and sedition and obstructing an official proceeding in this manner for when they want to sentence people at the top of the attempted coup or the successful coup, if you talk about delaying the electoral count, especially maybe on the 1512c2 obstructing an official proceeding crime or seditious conspiracy, which would probably be, the sentencing guidelines are probably calculated the same way you do seditious conspiracy, because they go to treason and then they go to obstruction because there aren't any. So it seemed very interesting, the timing on that appeal as well, because it's been 6 weeks since we got those sentences handed down.
Yeah. So a couple things on this. I think it's worth noting how rare this is, right? In many garden variety, day after day criminal cases, the department doesn't even make a recommendation. They simply say, here's what the guidelines call for, and they leave it up to the court. They very rarely ever go back in and try to kind of pile on and squeeze additional time out of a sentence that's been given. They kind of just take their lumps and walk away even when they're not particularly satisfied. So when you look at it from that perspective, this definitely has the feel that the government is trying to raise the roof, right? They're concerned that this has set a bar for the most active, arguably most culpable kind of people on the ground on January 6th. And they're trying to knock this thing a little bit higher to give themselves additional sentencing room for people who they might have coming down the line, currently indicted or maybe soon to be indicted, who they would want to argue are worthy of even longer sentences. Now, to be fair, the filing that DOJ made was simply a notice of appeal. So they haven't actually made their appeal yet. They haven't made their arguments and laid them out for us to say, what exactly they're arguing or claiming. So we don't really know yet, but watch this space, and we will, I'm sure, discuss it when we get more from them.
They might be waiting to see if they get a vote on a true bill for an indictment for some of these other people they intend to charge before they start going to paper on increasing the sentences for the Oath Keeper. Who knows? But we don't know the reasoning, but that would be one of my guesses. And, one of the rules of sentencing guidelines is like criminals need to be sentenced like other criminals who have done like crimes.
That's right.
And this being January 6th being its own sort of in its own category of crime, if you have a downward departure of 8 years for somebody who obstructed an official proceeding on January 6th and you want to charge Trump, you aren't going to be able to go to that 25-year recommended sentence for that particular crime if other people who have done the same thing on the same day weren't sentenced to that as well. So that's actually one of the rules of sentencing, right?
Yep.
When you put your recommendations forward. So we'll see what ends up happening. We'll see all the timing of all this. I imagine if an indictment comes down, we might see that appeal be filed. But, again, we're just, all of this is speculation. We're just sort of reading the tea leaves, like we say.
Yep.
All right, we have a lot more news to get to, believe it or not. That's not the entire show. We have to talk about some stuff that happened in the documents case, and then we'll answer some questions at the end as well. So stick around. We'll be right back. Hey, everybody, welcome back. As predicted, Andy, Trump has filed a motion to delay his documents trial. We're pivoting now to Mar-a-Lago. He wants it to take place indefinitely, sometime after the election.
Just after never.
Yeah, because that's totally what innocent people do.
Sure.
Right? No, I'm sorry. If I'm running for president and I'm innocent and I can have this trial over and done with and be acquitted,
Speedy
heading
trial,
into the primary,
baby. Hammer your rights. Speedy trial all day long. Yeah.
I'm asking for a speedy trial. I mean, can you imagine what an acquittal would do for your campaign?
I mean, but if he thinks he raised a lot of money on the indictment, I mean, it would be an embarrassment of cash falling out of the sky if he had an acquittal during the campaign.
Acquittal could carry him to the White House.
Yeah.
But he knows that that's not going to happen. So he wants to delay this. He doesn't want a speedy trial. But before we get to the filings, there is a breaking update in the documents case. You remember how in the the motion for a protective order again for the unclassified discovery, they were like, this is still an ongoing investigation. That's why you can't give it to the media and tell everybody about our stuff. Well, the ongoing investigation, it looks like it might be about to produce some fruit. We have reporting that a low-level Trump Organization employee has been sent a target letter. And I'm wondering if this is the guy who flooded the server room or perhaps the IT guy who told him where the surveillance tapes are. But according to the New York Times, it has to do with the handling of the surveillance footage.
Yeah.
And it's a low-level Mar-a-Lago employee. At first, I thought we might be frying up some calamari, but this is a low-level employee, according to the Times. So what are your thoughts on this? I mean, we sort of pointed out that whole scenario of the flooding of the server room was missing and totally absent from this indictment. So This is interesting.
And we know, we've been tracking this kind of narrative with the Jack Smith team on the documents case, that there's this kind of this concern about possibly manipulating the surveillance tapes or obstructing their access to the surveillance tapes has been kind of bubbling up to the surface over the course of subpoenas and witness testimony. We haven't really been able to put it together, in a logical format yet. But this definitely sends a signal that they have someone in their sights who they believe may have been involved in either altering or obstructing their access to that video. And
lying about it.
Right.
And to the FBI in DC, that's also something that they pointed out in the reporting that might be what's going on here, might be what it's about. And the only other thing we know is that Stanley Woodward is their lawyer, whoever this is.
Of course he is. Come on. No wonder he can't get around to, getting his security clearance squared away for the indictment. Yeah, I mean, I think this is the rules are you can continue investigating and you can do it through the existing grand jury that's already brought an indictment, as long as you're going after new stuff, essentially. You're not supposed to keep using the grand jury for, to continue to perfect the charges you've already brought, although there's a fair amount of gray area in interpreting what it is you're doing and what the purpose of those investigative steps are. So it's pretty easy sometimes for prosecutors to make that rationalization. But here you have a good example of, no, we're continuing to use this grand jury for the purpose of pursuing other defendants who are related to this matter. Now, when they bring any additional charges, will have a big impact on whether or not that person is actually joined to the existing case, or whether they proceed, in the form of a superseding indictment, or they proceed on their own in a totally separate path, individual case. That's my guess of what will happen here, even not knowing who it's going to be or what the charges are. But it sounds from the reporting so far, it's a much smaller, kind of more isolated potential criminal activity than the scope of what we're looking at in the documents indictment so far.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and if it was for lying and he did it in D.C. and he also wasn't part of the conspiracy, the charges could come in D.C.
Yes,
but also Nauta lied to the investigators in D.C., but he was also part of the conspiracy that happened at Mar-a-Lago, so that might have made sense to go down there. So we'll see what ends up happening.
Yes.
But also, so let's talk about the filing. Trump filed for an indefinite continuance, saying based on the extraordinary nature of this action, there is most assuredly no reason for any expedited trial, and the ends of justice are best served by a continuance. So this is going to be the first big test to see what Cannon will do. I mean, we'll talk about the 4-day delayed CIPA conference in a second, but that wasn't, they both parties agreed to delay that 4 days. So that's not really a Cannon call.
Right.
She could have made it later, but she didn't. She agreed to what the parties agreed to. So we're going to see, as of this recording, we do not yet know how she's going to rule on this. But some of Trump's arguments from the July 10th filing include the classification status of the documents and their purported impact on national security interests makes this complex. The propriety of utilizing any secret evidence in a case of this nature, the inability to select an impartial jury during a presidential election, extensive and voluminous discovery. Come on. See Manafort. The challenges presented by the purportedly classified material that has yet to be produced, and the completion of the security clearance process, which
how about the initiation of the security clearance process, which we know.
How about you fill out your form, bro?
Yeah, it's delayed. That's like complaining about the line being too long at DMV when you haven't even gone to DMV yet. I mean, like, it's let's go, guys, get in the ring. Some of these claims are just so strange to me because they're really attacking the system itself, the efficacy of these charges in the context of a request for a continuance, essentially. The classification status of the documents and their purported impact on national security interests. Yeah, you should have thought of that before you started storing them in your bathroom or in the ballroom. The propriety of utilizing secret evidence in a case of this nature. Like, these are all esoteric kind of theories, not actual reasons. Hey, judge, we need to push this case back for this number of months or until after X event for the following legal reasons. And that's really, I thought the government's response to this was really kind of zeroed them in on the law and the facts. There's nothing to this. There's no reason why Cannon should countenance it, but we shall see. That's the question now.
And kind of exactly the arguments that you make when you and I talked after you had read his motion for a continuance, because DOJ says, first of all, there's no basis in law or fact for proceeding in such an intermediate and open-ended fashion.
There you go.
And the defendants provide none. So they said he didn't even bring up the Speedy Trial Act of 1974, and all discussions must start there. So with all of his, the little list of complaints that you just read, just like your response, the DOJ said, first, your legal issues aren't new. You're not new here.
Right.
Okay. And then as for the impact of the Presidential Records Act on this prosecution, any argument that it mandates dismissal of the indictment or forms a defense to the charges, that borders on frivolous. I think it is frivolous, but they said borders on frivolous. Frivolous is a strong word to use in a court document. Mm-hmm. Now, here's my favorite. This is a quote. The PRA is not a criminal statute and in no way purports to address the retention of national security information. The defendants are, of course, free to make whatever arguments they like for dismissal of an indictment, and the government will respond promptly. But they should not be permitted to gesture at a baseless legal argument, call it novel, and then claim the court will require an indefinite continuance in order to resolve it. So well put.
Yeah, I mean, this is like demanding the relief that you would get from winning a motion, like a motion to dismiss the indictment, before you've ever filed the indictment, much less filed the motion or argued it. I mean, they're basically...
He likes to do that. He did it with the special master thing before he was ever indicted. He was like, well, I need my evidence.
That's right. I say he, but of course we mean his lawyers in this case. They are basically making an argument that is, this whole thing should go away. It's not fair. It's not proper, in the context of, please give us a couple more months, which is just makes no sense whatsoever.
No, absolutely not. And we assumed that it wouldn't. The DOJ goes on to say discovery does not warrant a continuance. SEPA doesn't warrant a continuance. Defendants' remaining arguments are meritless. Here's a good quote. The fact that you think you may be able to get the whole case dismissed isn't a reason under the Speedy Trial Act for a continuance. Plus, you cite no case law, which makes sense because you have it backwards. To say you can't get an impartial jury simply isn't true either. We have the jury selection process. It's there. It's been there for a long time. You're not new. And if there's are extra considerations, that's the reason to start the process. That's a reason to start sooner,
of course,
not later.
Of course.
Then they close with, finally, the demands of defendants' professional schedules do not provide a basis to delay the trial. Many people who are indicted have demanding jobs that require a considerable amount of their time and energy or a significant amount of travel. The Speedy Trial Act contemplates no such factor as a basis for a continuance, and the court should not indulge it here. So,
yeah, and
Very good filing.
The reply brief is a very worthy read. It's only about 8 or 9 pages long, and it's very factual. It says, he's complaining he has too much discovery. Here's exactly the discovery we've given him so far. Here's what he's getting next week. It's all been indexed in a way that's easy to get through it. So you actually learn a lot about the nitty-gritty of what's been going on between the two parties. So I totally recommend taking a look at it. I love the part about him complaining that he can't hire contractors to help review the discovery. Like, why not? There's no limitation on adding people to your defense team to meet your timing obligations. And he certainly has the abundant resources to get that done.
Maybe Melania can do it. She got $155,000 from the Save America PAC. Maybe you could put Melania on it.
Yeah, and then the final insult, of course, is that only 2 of these people have actually gone to put themselves out to fill out the SF-86, which is the form that you have to submit in order to get the clearance to review the classified evidence, which right now they're complaining that they can't do. Well, finish the paperwork and submit it, and then you can review it all day long. It's just, I think it's a great peek at what we can expect here. Every step of this thing is going to be fought viciously. You're going to see ridiculous motions from the defense team, and Jack Smith's folks are going to dig in and fight back on every single one of them. So, the wild card is, as I said, it's Judge Cannon. And I honestly, having read both briefs, I have no idea where she'll come out on this thing. I think it's entirely possible that she just layers in her own kind of individual, not legally based, but kind of judgment in the way that she did over the special master case. And just
gave him deference because he's a president or a former president or a presidential candidate. She might say, well, at the time, even though the 11th Circuit told me to F off, that was because I said it was a former president, but now he's actually a presidential candidate, so that weighs differently, so I'm allowing
it's going to be really hard for him to campaign and also defend himself at the same time, therefore let's put off the case. You could totally see her coming out with a ruling that says essentially that, and whatever she does decide in terms of running the docket on this case, really hard to appeal. It's hard to get that stuff in front of an appeals court in a way that will put them in a position to kind of smack it down. So we'll have to wait and see. But I think
because that's not a SEPA trigger that allows for an expedited appeal with the 11th Circuit.
Yeah, it does not. So, and judges have a lot of authority. They have a lot of discretion to figure out how they're going to time things in their own courthouses. I think appellate courts are generally loath to get involved in that. But we'll see if she comes out with a holding that has really no grounding in existing precedent whatsoever. I think you can expect at least an effort to appeal it on the government's part.
Yeah. And then if she does come out with something like that, I would say, well, you set the original trial for August 14th with no consideration about a presidential candidacy. So no, too bad, so sad.
On the other hand, to counter my gloomy outlook on this one, you have to assume that she knows the world is watching. This is the first big impactful decision she's going to make in this case. If she does it in a way that sets the legal world howling about how absurd and baseless it is, that is just going to like really put her in a bad spot. So I hope that she's feeling that pressure, that she understands that, everything she does in this case is going to be scrutinized very closely. And this is the first opportunity for that. So that's a good time to try to get it right.
Yeah, and she might want to stay on so she can mess shit up later. Who knows? Anyway, and we're going to talk more about this SEPA conference that's happening Tuesday, but we have to take a quick break. Everybody stick around.
Okay, welcome back. Now, before we get to this week's listener question, just a couple of things to cover in the documents case. First, Allison, we have SEPA Section 2 conference on Tuesday. Now, you remember that this was delayed because of Walton Auta and his lawyer's argument that he didn't have clearance to be able to proceed to this hearing, although it's actually not necessary for this hearing. So he didn't get quite the delay that he was looking for. They agreed to a 4-day delay with DOJ, which sounds quite like DOJ schooled Woodward on SEPA Section 2 and reminded him that he has had 3 weeks to fill out his SF-86, as I've just been complaining. So yeah, I mean, this is starting to, I tried not to be all conspiratorial about this from the beginning, but it really is starting to look like they are looking at every utterance in this case as an opportunity to squeeze 5 days, 5 minutes, 5 weeks, 5 months, whatever, of delay any chance they can. So I feel like you're already seeing that kind of leak into the SEPA process. Now, the fact that they resolved the delay issue in a consent decree, you can pretty much expect the judge is never going to insert herself into those things. And she's essentially refereeing a fight between two parties. And anytime they can come to an agreement between themselves on something that's even remotely reasonable, she's going to let that rule the day. So this one worked out in a fairly predictable way. But in addition to that, we have DOJ filing a speedy trial report. This was filed on July 11th, one day after Trump filed to delay his trial until after the election. Now, the speedy trial report is something that's required by the local rules, and also it's in the court's omnibus order establishing pretrial instructions. So the way this works is, as you know, Allison, there's the defendant essentially holds the speedy trial right. This is in normal cases where defendants actually want to get trials over with. Not so much
Right.
this one, but nevertheless, the rights still apply. And there is essentially a clock ticking, counting days, because the speedy trial basically says you have to get to the trial within about 70 days. And so along the course, DOJ has to file these reports to say, like, officially how many days have been clocked in the progression towards speedy trial. Now, you can stop the clock, or as they say in court, toll the clock at different points when there's motions being argued and things like that. So that's why DOJ's counting essentially of the days has to be filed with the court to help the judge keep track of where they are on that speedy trial calendar. So in any case, the United States submits this in writing, post-indictment, and apparently their report is that they have had 5 non-excludable days, and the Speedy Trial Act, so far 23 days have tolled officially since the indictment.
Yep. So of the, when this was filed, 28 days from arraignment, 23 of those days don't count and 5 of them do. And that's just the report that they have to put in there. So we got 65 days to go to go for the speedy trial clock. But I guess the thing is, if it's the defendant's right, how can the DOJ push it? Is their argument like we would be violating their right to a speedy trial if we don't get this done? Because if Trump just officially waived his right to a speedy trial with a thing, can DOJ keep arguing speedy trial?
They can, and that's what I thought was so interesting about the reply brief that we were just talking about in the last section. So, although under normal circumstances, the government doesn't really have an opportunity to rush a defendant to prepare for trial. It's usually the other way around, right? The defendants, as we were joking a minute ago, typically want to push the government to get off their butts and get ready for trial and get this thing over with. And that's kind of how the speedy trial right is usually executed. That's why people say
Sussman did it. Sussman did it because he knew he was going to be acquitted. He was innocent. He's like, let's get this over with, snippety snap. But if it's the DOJ who wants it, how does that even work?
Yeah, he did. And also, I think Greg Craig in his trial a while ago did the same thing. But nevertheless, here you have the totally flipped situation where it's the defendant that wants to drag things out. So in their brief, or in their response to Trump's motion, the government bases their entire position on this idea that the speedy trial right is not just the possession of the defendant, but there is it's based in the Constitution and, of course, laid out in the Speedy Trial Act that justice demands that trials take place in a timely manner. And so they're actually relying on kind of the fundamental foundations of the speedy trial right, not so much the counting of the clock, but like, hey, we're trying to do justice here, and therefore it needs to be conducted and done in a timely manner. I thought that was I've never seen the government have to argue that before. And it's in the public
interest.
Yeah, exactly. So it's kind of an interesting position. We'll see if it motivates the judge to actually hold everybody accountable to getting things done in a timely fashion.
Yeah, we'll see. All right, it is time for a listener question. If you have a question, you can send it in to us, hello@MullerSheWrote.com. Make sure you put the word Jack in the subject line or it will get lost in the shuffle. What do we have this week, Andy?
All right, so we have one question this week from Sydney. Sydney gives us a terrific question. We haven't really talked about this, I don't think, at all so far. So Sydney starts, what will it be like for the jurors in Florida that will decide Donald's fate? He is notorious for alleged witness tampering. I wouldn't put it past him to try to intimidate jurors. Also, how might Donald try to delay the trial with jury selection? Couldn't he just claim, quote, they all hate Trump, Republicans, whatever, and, kind of claim to be the victim since he's such a publicly known figure? And then, of course, she very nicely finishes the question with, I love this show so much. Thank you all for doing it. So, okay, I'm going to be honest, that influenced my selection of this question this week.
Oh yeah, bias.
Yeah. It does work.
A little question selection in your
you flatter the
voir dire. You
flatter the question selector and you improve your chances. I'm just saying. So to get back to her question, it's a really good one. There's a bunch of things that I think we can expect the court to do to protect the jurors in this case. And not just because it's, specifically Donald Trump, but because it is a very high profile case, one that will be watched with intense, massive media coverage, and quite frankly, one that's going to grab the attention of a large portion of the population of the country. Some folks who are very, very intensely emotional and some to the point of anger about the fact that this is happening and what the outcome will be. So one of the things the judge will do is probably make the jurors all anonymous, which means they'll go through the jury selection process where they'll have to fill out a pretty extensive questionnaire, which will request all kinds of information about their backgrounds and their prior experiences with the legal system, and questions about that go to the issue of whether or not they can be impartial. And those questionnaires will all be by number, so the attorneys for either side won't actually know the true identity of the individual jurors. It's also possible that the jurors, once selected, will be sequestered for the duration of the trial, which will mean, they don't go home. They live in a hotel. They get brought into the court every day through kind of surreptitious means, so people can't see them. They can't be filmed or photographed. And they kind of live together as this little group of 12 plus however many alternates they impanel or they select. And that is a very intense and stressful experience. If you read any of the accounts of jurors who've gone through that, it's, being removed from your family and kept in this little kind of isolation. They're not allowed to read the news media. They're not allowed to go on the internet. So they're really very isolated. But I would expect they'll do both of those things in this case. And that typically is enough to prevent jurors from being tampered with by any defendant or people who feel like they're doing the defendant's bidding.
Yeah, and as you were talking, I wrote down the anonymized jury in the E. Jean Carroll trial.
Yep.
They were anonymized, but they were not sequestered. But I can't imagine this is one of the most high profile cases we've ever had. And then if there's also a 1-6 trial, that they wouldn't sequester these jurors. They've done it. We sequester juries a lot in this country. It seems like this trial would qualify.
Yeah. It's of course not the majority of cases, but it's not uncommon.
I mean, it's rare.
Rare, but it does happen.
It happens
fairly frequently. And yeah, you can't. I mean, show me a better case show me a better case in which you would want to protect these jurors. I
imagine you worked with a lot of counterterrorism stuff and mafia stuff where they had to sequester these folks for their safety, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's really it's not so much like singularly because you're worried about the defendant trying to tamper with them, although maybe that's part of your concern, but it's really more you don't want the public to know who they are, where they live, who they're married to, who their families are, because you don't want to subject them to the sort of intense harassment and scrutiny that we all know has become commonplace today in the age of internet and social media. And I should also say is a tactic that we've seen employed by supporters of the president and people who were particularly frustrated with the outcome of the 2020 election. You've seen election officials and volunteers, poll workers in states across the country who've been threatened, and some of whom have actually been the subject of attempted acts of violence. So there's a serious threat here, and I think probably they'll do everything they can to protect these folks.
Yeah, that sounds reasonable to me. All right, thank you so much for that question. And remember, flatter the question selector, and you might get your. Now watch what happens.
I'm waiting. I can't wait.
In our inbox, Andy, if you need a boost of confidence, you just give me a call. I'll talk to you.
This is the best. I'm always afraid of what people might be saying, but now I'm just going to tee it up. Only say nice things. There you go.
Oh, that's funny. So again, you can send that to hello@MuellerSheWrote.com. Put Jack in the subject line, and we'll get to your question. And thank you so much to Norm Eisen for joining us today.
He's the best.
To talk about that model prosecution memo. This has been a heck of a week. And as we always wonder what's going to happen next week, it's always something pretty major. So, I think we're on indictment watch. We'll see what ends up happening. It's been a great show. So thank you so much.
Buckle in, because it's not going to start slowing down. It's only going to keep picking up. We'll be learning more stuff, and we'll do our best to squeeze it in. So all good.
Thanks. All right, I've been Allison Gill,
and I'm Andy McCabe.
We'll see you next week on Jack.